All right, so welcome to the Developer's Diary for version 4.2. I'm here with Morten Monk, and it's been 18 months since our last Developer's Diary. So before we get started, what have you been up to?
Hi, Peter. Thank you for the privilege of doing this. Yeah, geez, 18 months. It's been a long time. I guess
Um,
we released 4.1 without any videos.
right.
Yeah, we must have forgotten about that, I guess. So
Yeah,
it's about time we do a 4.2 video then.
yeah. Before we talk specifically about 4.2, can you just tell me your philosophy about having a living game where we continue to do updates versus kind of finishing a game and then walking away from it? What some people might say, "Gosh, how often are you guys going to keep updating the game? Is it a good thing that we keep doing updates, or is that a bad thing?"
Well, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a necessary thing. Um, if you don't um, if you don't feed your pet, eventually it's going to die. And I don't think you're able to make a game that is finished,
Right.
um, because at some point you will lose interest. You will have played it through, found the perfect way of winning, and then you will lose interest. Um, I've never heard about a game that was actually finished. Um, Not a World War II board game. Uh, anyway,
Yeah, me neither. If we don't keep
so
adapting, it leads to stagnation. So I'm sure there are some people that are like, gosh, I'm having to learn new rules with 4.2, but it beats the alternative of stagnation. So,
I don't think there is an alternative, and I also think that people they invest a lot of money in their, let's call them rigs or setups, right? And they buy 3D printed pieces. Some even paint. I know you do. So the hobby can get somewhat expensive, and I mean I don't think it's that much of a problem as long as you know that you will have decades of fun ahead of you.
yeah.
So paying 500 bucks for various pieces or add-ons is perhaps less of a less of a pain.
hmm
Um,
The investment pays off.
so yeah, yeah, you can say that. And I also think that the amount of enjoyment to be had uh, within a game, um, we are always able to improve on that. So make it a bit more interesting, a bit more streamlined, a bit more challenging in a way. Um, so yeah, I think updating the rules regularly is uh, is a necessity.
With version 4.2, what kind of specific goals, what was driving your vision as far as what needed to be changed or fixed with version 4.2?
You can tell that, well, you can say that 4.1 was a bit of cleanup after the big uh, version 4 release. So after 4.1, we were in a good position. Uh, we had a good foundation. So we wanted to explore some new things. Um, and I had my first objective was, I think it was looking into how cities are represented in the game. And previously, there was not that much of a difference between a city land zone and a regular land zone. There were some minor bonuses to be had, but I didn't think that um, it was well enough represented how challenging cities actually were, especially on the Eastern Front with Leningrad, Stalingrad. And so we looked into how we could um, make cities more special. Um, so we had a lot of ideas, tried a few things out, and we ended up with the rules that is now in the core game, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. And so these city rules have actually seen quite a lot of playthrough already, and we've seen some really fun and interesting things happening due to the due to the limit of the number of combat rounds.
You mind if I
And
introduce viewers to what kind of changes you're talking about, and then you can talk further about the impact of the city change? Um,
yeah, please do. Yeah,
okay,
please do.
so the first is that when attacking a city, you're limited to 3 rounds of combat. So if you don't take the city in 3 turns, then you must retreat with whatever you still have. The second really big change is that vehicles attacking into cities have a -2 value to their combat. So if unless you surround a city, it's really going to be a lot harder to take a city. Um, and when you surround a city, are you still are limited to 3 turns? Is that correct? If you surround the city, but your
Yes.
vehicles attack at full value if you've surrounded the city. So that's a huge change. One other thing about cities is that airborne infantry that are airborne assaulting face an inherent AA from cities. That can be overcome if you develop airborne doctrine. Then you don't face that inherent AA from cities. So that kind of helps your defense from cities that are being attacked remotely with airborne, and your cities are much more robust in defending if they're not surrounded. So just to bring people up to speed. So what are your thoughts about how that's impacted the game in your play testing?
Well, I actually thought that it would require a lot of testing to really get it right. But surprisingly enough, after even I think 1 or 2 playtests, we were really stoked about how it turned out, and we quite early in the testing phase saw these very positive impacts it had on the game. Um, Besides the tweaking of the city land zones, um, one of the one of the changes were, as you say, the -2 for vehicle class. Um, and keep in mind that we have all these 50 or so units in the game, and it's a fine balance between how they are used, how much they're used, if they're used, or are they abused. And we're continuously walking this fine line between we don't want a super unit. So if we want to have a mixed variety of units in play, and there are various ways of going about doing this. So the -2 for the vehicle class, except when surrounded, is also a part of this tweaking the fine line. So the almighty medium armor with advanced mechanized infantry is no longer the answer to all your prayers in Eastern Europe. Well, at least not if you're not able to surround the cities. Then what? And this dilemma of do I surround? Do I go for the direct city? Do I have enough? Let's say that you're unlucky in round 1, so then you don't make it within within the round limits, it brings a lot of excitement to the game. Uh, and we've seen several instances of uh, if it would just have gone one more round, then the attacker would have won. Well, it didn't go one more round.
Right.
So then he has to retreat. Let's say he doesn't have air cover because his aircraft were participating from further back. So now he has his expensive units left open for counterattack. That brings a lot of good things to the game. So I think it's actually it's a simple chain. It's easy to understand. It's easy to remember. But the ability with surrounding and the limits of the rounds brings a lot of strategic depth into cities combat, which is what we wanted. We tested some other things that was removed again, simply because it was too complicated or it didn't work. Because there's it's so easy to just add new stuff in, but we don't want it to be overwhelming. So it's a fine line. But I think everyone in the on the design team is quite happy with how the cities ended up becoming.
So that was one of the major changes. Another major change was for supply paths. There's a change in how supply paths work. Instead of naming a starting port and a destination port and then tracing the shortest line between them, now the way that we trace supply, well, that would be delivering Lend-lease that I was talking about, but supply is going to change so that it makes a daisy chain from port to port to port, or naval facility to naval facility. If it's a major naval facility, you can count 5 spaces to the next naval facility. But if it's a minor naval facility, then only 3 spaces. And you're going to have to name as you go from starting port to the next port to the next port. So, for example, if you were going from Sydney and you were going over to Adelaide, that major port at the southern part of Australia, then you'd count 1 for C Zone 70, 2 for C Zone 69, 3 for C Zone I-14, 4 for C Zone I-9, and then 5 to C Zone I-2, Mauritius. So you could go into that little minor port there, and then from there, count over 2 over to South Africa, and then supply Cape Town. So because of this, it seems like now you can interdict supply paths along the middle of that path, or at these far-flung minor naval facilities, instead of just right at the start and right at the finish, stopping the supply path. First of all, why do you think we need to have that change, and what's been the impact on that?
It actually it actually began again with the desire to simplify the supply path rules. So if you called up your ex-girlfriend at 3 o'clock in the morning and you needed to explain how supply path worked and how the Lend-lease deliveries worked, and you would have a hard time explaining it in 20 seconds. So it was not it was something in the game that we thought was confusing, and it was not. It was I mean it worked, but it could need some uh, some improvement for sure. So we wanted to simplify the supply rules. So I think we 90% of the work in 4.2 was actually done in this area, because once you start opening up Pandora's box, the whole thing just explodes, right? So suddenly there's a lot of moving pieces, um, and a lot of opportunities arise too, because wait a minute, this shortest path for Lend-lease delivery, well, why have that? And where does it come from? And a lot of that is historical. Let's call it inheritance from earlier games, right? Um, so quite quickly, we also realized that wait a minute, there's actually a lot of not only simplifying, but there's also a lot of strategic potential here,
Right.
um, because the whole thing about supply as a concept, it was quite important to be in supply, right? And it still is. So we wanted to see if we could include that concept in the game without making it complicated. Um, so we also we tested a lot of stuff, and some of the stuff was removed again. Uh, but we actually found that this thing about daisy chaining, where you're actually able to interdict the supply path, it opens up the map in whole new ways.
Definitely.
You mentioned Mauritius. It's actually quite important because let's say that you have a German player that is having a lot of subs in the Atlantic, and it could be that the Italians perhaps they have units in the Mediterranean. So the only way for the British to actually reach South Africa with a supply path is going across the US through Panama Canal, south of Australia, via Mauritius for the factory in Cape Town. And without that supply path, the factory doesn't work. So you might say, well, this is perhaps a fragile situation. It might be that you want to upgrade a port in the Caribbean to make sure that you have a second possible supply path. It could be that, let's say that Australia is taken by the Japanese. Then what? So there's a lot of new thinking that is going on in this area, and it really affects the game because one thing is that factories are not able to produce, but we streamlined everything, so it also so there's only one type of supply path now.
Mm.
Um, so unit upgrades, Lend-lease, everything happens via the same mechanics. And we also integrated it with tech, so you're able to increase the range of your supply path. Um, but also strategic naval movement is also a part of this. So we actually streamlined quite a lot. So even
Yes.
though that the 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 end result is more options, more strategic uh, elements, I actually think that the rules are much simpler.
Mm.
It's much more simple to understand. I'm not sure if you can explain it to your ex-girlfriend in the middle of the night, um,
Morton,
but still,
if I had a
it's
girlfriend who played Global War 36 with me, she would never be an ex-girlfriend. So but you're absolutely right that it is much simpler because even when I was trying to just explain what's new in 4.2 with the way supply paths work, I was comparing it to Lend-lease delivery, which was different than supply path delivery, which was different than
yeah.
Deutsche Africa Corps delivery. Everything is the same, and that is much easier. It's going to be easier for new players to understand how that works. And it's really cool that in the one playtesting game that I've been in, Hambone is the U.S. and he was wanting to send Lend-lease to the French in where their capital was in Cameroon, but he hadn't upgraded the port in Puerto Rico, or Puerto Rico didn't have a naval facility, so he couldn't trace down to get to the French. So that already changed in just the first game. I'm seeing how it has an impact, and there is an incentive for you to have some major naval facilities in places where perhaps you didn't need to have them in the past. So there's been some changes to Lend-lease specifically, diplomatically. I guess I'll talk about them and you can say why we needed to make those changes. So, for example, USSR in version 4.2 has the same kind of Lend-lease as most other major powers have, which is they need to be at war. And before the USSR didn't need to be at war to send Lend-lease, except for a few exceptions, like Russia can send, of course, to the Spanish Republicans before they're at war. But now, in order for them to Lend-lease to, say, the French, the so the the French need to be at war with a major power. So there were a lot of in prior games before 4.2. There were a lot of times that Russia would make deals with other powers, and they would Lend-lease to countries that were not yet at war with a major power because they had no restrictions. Now they are restricted. And similarly, Great Britain had an interesting thing in earlier versions where they could Lend-lease to a country as long as Great Britain was at war with a major power. So they could send to a totally neutral country, for example, Finland, or they could send to Iran, even though those countries were not yet at war. So why did you make those changes, and what's been the impact of that?
I think there were two reasons. So one was one is the dealing that you mentioned. Uh, so prior to this version, uh, Russia would get a lot of value from sending an AA gun or something to Abyssinia.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was actually something that we did in all our games, more or less. And we didn't, it didn't feel right. It's not very historical. Um, so we wanted to look into how this could be changed. Um, so one thing is that now you're not able to use other alliances facilities to deliver Lend-lease. So that is closed that problem because they cannot Lend-lease via the French port because it's another alliance. But then we looked into the rules more and realized that wait a minute, all these different conditions for Lend-lease, why not just make them? Why not simplify it? So now it's more simple to understand. Uh, there's less dealing to be done. I'm not a big fan of this unhistorical dealing under the table, or I know that a lot of players they love doing it, but I would like to keep people honest, uh, if I may say so.
You seem to like to increase the hatred, is what you've told me before. You want to fuel the hatred between the alliances.
Yes, um, I love when people they hate each other. So yeah, and you can actually if you look carefully into the rules, you will see a lot of tweaks that actually stop this dealing from occurring. Um, and a lot of these is weird outflung scenarios, which normally won't come into play, but a lot of them they stop these dealing scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, it's a three alliance game, and we don't want or can't stop people from talking and cooperating. But we want the hatred to be substantial between the alliances.
Just
And
go ahead.
yeah,
Okay, just before we finish up
no, it's
Lend-lease, I want to say two more little changes. Well, important changes to Lend-lease are there's no longer the port size requirement for certain IPP value of units. You can send a fighter to a minor port. It's the tracing of that supply path. That's where the major and minor naval facilities come into play. And then you also eliminated the ability with Lend-lease to send a single stage naval unit to be built in the receiving power. Was that for simplification, those two changes, or were there particular problems that we're trying to solve with those changes?
so the mine and port limit um, was superseded. Um, we can say that by the supply path rules
Mm-hmm.
because now it's just a supply path. And if you're able to trace a path using minor ports, by all means, you can deliver whatever you want. Um, and the other thing, the one that was taken out was it was actually put in for Vichy so that Germany could lend lease transport to Vichy. Um, but that was also superseded by the new ability of Vichy to spend their own money.
Mm-hmm.
So the new ability for Vichy to spend their own money is a better solution because uh, one, the German player has to, it's a bit of a dilemma. Do I take the money and spend it, or do I give it to Vichy to build units and ships and whatever? And and so that was also superseded. So every time we can take something out that is no longer needed, it's a big win for us because it reduces the complexity and less and it's less rules to worry about.
Yeah. Um, Morton, I'd like to wrap up this section on the major changes that we made, and maybe we'll do another one. The next one will be on special abilities. That way we can put it in perhaps 30-minute hunks. So thank you so much,
Sounds good to me.
and we'll start one. We'll record another one right after this.